Hi guys, Jordan with Motion Array, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create an amazing sky replacement right inside of DaVinci Resolve, whether you want to create something that's more realistic or absolutely surreal. And keep watching till the end of the video to hear how you could win a 3-month subscription to motionarray.com. Sky replacements are one of those editing effects that look really tough to pull off, and they can be kind of difficult if you don't know the steps to actually achieve it. But I'm going to be showing you exactly how you can pull this effect off, and it's going to be a lot simpler than you were expecting. I'm going to be showing you a couple different methods based off of your particular situation, but the nice thing is that all of the methods we're showing in this video are available in DaVinci Resolve's free version. So it doesn't matter if you already own it or if you're just starting out editing, you can pick up this software for free and learn how to get this effect. So let's dive right into DaVinci Resolve and take a look at how to replace your sky. Okay, so here we are in DaVinci Resolve, and I've got a few different clips here that have not bad skies at all, but skies that I definitely would want to work with in order to make look a little bit better. This one, for example, is the one that I'm going to be working with, so I'm going to click and drag it onto my timeline, and you can see that there's nothing wrong with this sky. Like, the subject looks great, the scene is great, the sky even doesn't, it's not necessarily overblown because you can see some details in it, it's just bland, and I want to change that. I want to make it look a little bit more interesting and have a little bit more pop to it. So you can see here I've got a clouds layer here, some cloud footage that I want to place underneath. So the first thing is actually maybe a little bit counterintuitive. You want to have the thing that you're replacing the sky with underneath your subject layer. So I'm going to move my subject layer up one layer, then I'm going to take this clouds layer here and put it underneath. So you might think that we're going to be going into Fusion now. We're actually not. I'm going to be showing you a method here that doesn't require Fusion as long as you've got a still scene. If you do have camera motion, you can still use this method exactly the same and then just pop into Fusion at the very end. Highlight the clip with the sky layer that you want to replace and then go into your color tab. And from here, we're going to be going to our qualifier section here. And all you have to do is turn off hue, turn off saturation. That's in this first node here. If you're on 2, 3, or 4, that's what this will look like. We're in the first tab here under our qualifier section, our HSL section. Click on highlight here. And now when you click anywhere inside of your sky that you want to replace, you can see that it makes a selection that has your sky remain and everything else is grayed out. So this is looking actually like a really good selection right off the bat. It really helps that there's a lot of contrast between our sky and our subject that we want to keep, which is why this is a really great method if you have a blown out sky. So now at this point in time, you can work with tightening up your selection, but it's going to be a little bit challenging until you can see sort of how the footage is interacting with the other piece of footage that you're replacing the sky with. So for the moment, we're just going to leave it, even though there's some problems here like with the snow. But right now you're going to go to your keying section, click, and then under key output, you're going to see this little icon here. Click it, and that's going to reverse your selection here so that now our subject remains and our sky is completely removed. So now at this point, as soon as you uncheck highlight, you're going to notice it's not showing the footage underneath, and that's because we need to do one thing on our nodes section here. Your nodes section is up at the top right here. Click on nodes to activate and deactivate it. Once you've got this up here, you can click anywhere outside of your node, right click, and add alpha output. That's going to create this little blue dot here underneath your green dot here, and you can take this blue square and then connect it by clicking and dragging to the blue circle. And that's going to allow our alpha channel that we keyed out here originally to actually show through the layer underneath. And you can see that right off the bat, it's okay. It's not great. There's a lot of things that we need to change. There's this kind of weird haloing around our background, around the mountains here. It's keying out some of the snow here, which we don't want. And the tree section here does not look very good. But thankfully, our subject is actually looking like it's respecting the key pretty well. This is a great first step. So at this point in time, this is a great place to go back to your qualifier here and then go to all these detail sections here and kind of finesse this mask and try to make it look as awesome as possible. Now, if you were like me when you were starting to learn DaVinci Resolve and you see people zooming in and out and moving all around and you don't know how to do that, it's really frustrating. So if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, all you have to do is scroll in and out to zoom in and out. But how do you actually like move around? Well, for me with a mouse with a scroll wheel, click and hold that scroll wheel down, and then you can move around like so. But let's say, for example, you have like a trackpad or like a magic mouse or something else where there's no actual scroll wheel. All you have to do is click and hold Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and that'll add that secondary functionality. So now that you know how to scroll in and zoom in, let's work at sort of trying to finesse this mask. You can pull this in and out. You can adjust the softness here. See if that helps you a little bit, but watch out that you don't start to clip areas that you want to keep, like for example, your subject. If you have to choose between a nicely detailed key in a detail area here versus actually messing up your subject, always choose with keeping your subject looking nice. If that's not getting you the results that you want, you can also work with denoise. You can work with clean black, clean white, and you can also work with in-out radius. And for me, that's starting to get a bit of a better result. It's looking a little bit nicer, especially in the tree here. It's not perfect. It's actually a little harsh, but it's doing okay. But now at this point, we can see here that it's looking okay, but it's not quite looking realistic. And we still have these problem sections here in the snow. So how do we deal with that? We're actually going to be masking around the areas we'd like to keep and the areas that we want to avoid. So go down here to your window section, and we're going to create a power window. And I'm actually going to create a custom one by using the pen tool here. And we're just going to click and drag around the outside. It's just a really, really basic outline. It doesn't have to be perfect. By clicking and dragging, you're creating a little bit of an arc on each of those. Not even going to worry about my subject here at all. And once we get to the trees up here, I'm actually not going to worry about kind of including all of this. I'm actually just going to cut right through it. And you're going to see why in just a second. We're going to make it do a lot less work, and we're going to make it look a lot more natural as a result. And then once we finish up our power window, you can see that this looks kind of gross, especially around the tree here. So what was the point of that? Well, now let's go back to our mask here. Let's add some softness to it. And I'm going to add a lot until you start to see it coming out in the edges of the mountains there. So for me, something like 25 is actually doing a pretty good job. You can see here if we click and drag up and down, we can get a better understanding for how this is impacting our mountains. Now you might think here, why would you want to create this kind of haloing around the mountains? Well, if you actually look at mountains in real life, this is sort of what it looks like. You do have like a little bit of that natural glow around the mountains, especially when there's snow and stuff around it. So this is one of those situations where cutting corners inside of editing actually lines up with real life a little bit better. If you have something like buildings, for example, though, that you're a lot closer to, you'll want that to be a lot sharper instead of having that sort of halo around it. So just be careful. But now you'll notice that we do have a little bit of motion in our shots. When we move forward here, we are losing a little bit of that tracking. The nice thing about DaVinci Resolve is that you can really easily track your power windows here. So I'm going to actually just move this so that it's away from our subject and is only including things that are sort of going to be around the area that we want it to follow here. So the mountain is the only thing really included here. And you can click this play button here forwards to track forwards. And I'm always astounded by how amazing DaVinci Resolve's tracking system is here. Now you might think that's kind of weird. We just moved it aside and now it's not actually tracking in the area that we want it to. But this is great because now we can just click and move it back to the original area. And it's going to stick. It's going to do exactly what we're wanting it to. And it's following that trajectory exactly like we wanted it to. It's actually not looking terrible. So now the big question is, what do we do about this reflection here down in the bottom right? All you have to do is add another power window. And it's going to reveal those changes in the same way. Now this only works because our cloud layer is large enough so that it covers the entire frame. If yours didn't, for example, then what you would want to do is you'd want to add another cloud layer underneath, and then flip that by going to your color section for that particular cloud layer, and then going to your sizing option, and then flipping it. And if we wanted to be like picture perfect with ours, we would do that as well. But when you look at the results that we're getting, you actually can't tell the difference between the reflection and the surface layer here. It's pretty hard to tell the difference. So this is working out great, but you'll notice it doesn't look real still, and that's for two specific reasons. So let's deal with the first one. The first one is that our replacement footage isn't matching our original footage. You can see here that the blues are way too intense. This one, the sky here that we've placed in, has way more saturation than the original shot that we placed it into. So all we have to do is click on our cloud layer here. Let's go to hue versus saturation here under our curves, or you could, Or you could use just the saturation slider here, whatever your preference is. But let's take the saturation down, and all of a sudden it starts to feel a lot more realistic. The other option you have is that you can actually take your footage layer here, your subject layer, and you can increase that saturation to match. Either way is completely valid. And so at the end here, what you'll see is that we have a sky replacement, which has a little bit of a surreal feel, but looks actually pretty great. But this is pretty intense. It looks like the clouds are just like whipping by, and it's got still a bit of that surreal feel. If you want it to be a lot more realistic, you want these clouds to be pretty much stationary, then you need to turn this footage of clouds into a still image of clouds, because these are kind of going at a good pace here. So if you want these to be more still, then you can right click on the clouds layer and then go up to change clip speed. And over here on the right, you have the freeze frame option, which you can click to activate and change, and now your clouds are completely motionless. But you can see now there's a noticeable difference here. So because there is motion in our shot, we're gonna have to track our scene in order to deal with this properly. So this is the point in time. If your shot has motion like mine, sometimes you can hide it if there's a lot of motion with the clouds, but if you want complete realism, you want to track your scene, you're gonna have to go into Fusion. And I'm gonna show you how to do that right now. But first thing, let's duplicate our footage here, just in case we mess things up in a little bit here. I like to always keep our footage on the side, just if we need to go back to it, sort of as like a safety feature. So highlight your footage here, hold Alt, and then click and drag your footage over, and that just creates a duplicate. Now let's highlight our footage here, right click, and create a new Fusion clip. And from here, let's click and dive right into Fusion. And you can see here that we have exactly what we left off with. We have our media 1 in, media 2 in, our merge layer, which is combining these two, and finally getting our output. Now, if you're like me, you had a really tough time working with Fusion in the past, it can be a little frustrating to use new software, but I'm gonna walk you through exactly how to use this and how to understand it. So first of all, media in 1 and media in 2 are our subject layer and our cloud layer. But if you don't know how to actually differentiate these and which one is which, a really great way to deal with this is to highlight one that you want to see what it is, and then click 1, and that'll bring it up in your first monitor here. So now you know that media in 1 is your clouds layer. And if you wanted to really make it easy to remember, right click on that and click rename. And let's rename it clouds. Cool, so now we know that this is our clouds. And if we wanted to check what media in 2 is, just do the same thing. Highlight it, click 1, and we can see that this is our subject layer. So right click, rename. You can also hit F2 if that's easier for you. And this is our subject layer. So now everything's nicely labeled. And if you're wondering what each of these symbols mean here, these little triangles that are colored, they're just different inputs for different sections, but giving priority. So green is gonna show up in front, yellow is gonna show up in the middle, and blue is gonna show up in the background. So if we were to switch out our clouds so that our clouds are green and our subject is yellow, then it's reversed and now our clouds are in front. So let's take that off, put our subject on green, so it's in the foreground in front, and our clouds on the yellow, so it's in the midground, sort of behind it. So now how are we gonna track our scene so that our clouds match that same motion? It's really simple. Just go to the subject here that you wanna track the motion of that camera for, and hold Shift and Spacebar, and that'll pop up your tool selection option here. You're just gonna type in tracker, and you're gonna select the planar tracker option. Click add, and as long as that subject was highlighted originally, it's gonna show up in between your subject footage layer and the merge layer. If yours for some reason is off to the side, just click and drag it while holding Shift, and then insert it here in between your subject and the merge layer here. Great. So now we're gonna track our scene. So just click on planar tracker here, and up in the inspector window, you're gonna have a bunch of options that you can work with. It's really simple, just match my settings here. Track, point tracker. The motion type I'd like is translation, rotation, and scale, just because those are the 3 motions that are possibly in our camera movement here when the scene was shot originally. Output background, track channel luma. This is great. Now just make sure that you're on the very first frame, and then make a selection of an area of high contrast that you want it to follow the tracking of. So for me, I'm just gonna click and drag here to get some area here with there's snow and trees, nice high contrast area. And this is sort of the area that it's gonna be tracking. And because the tracker is linked to our subject layer, it's not going to pick up any of the clouds in the background, so it doesn't matter if that's overlapping. So now making sure that we're back on the first frame, let's click track to end. Awesome, that looks great. Now, as much as I've given Fusion a hard time in the past, I gotta say, this is a really intuitive way that they work with tracking. And once you're done here, all you have to do is click Create Planar Transform. And what it does is it pops up all the work that you just did as a little node here. And all you have to do is click and drag it and hold Shift and place it in between your clouds layer and the merge layer here. And now all that work you did to track your subject and the camera motion here, it's effectively translated into your shot here. So you can see that our cloud image, it's actually following the motion of the camera really well. I'm really impressed with this tracker. So you will notice though, that we are missing some of the edges of frame here just because it's pushing our cloud layer off to the side a little bit. Really easy to deal with. Click on your clouds layer so that we can actually work at moving this around. And there's no actual real transform options here in Inspector. You have to add that as a new effect. So make sure your clouds layer is selected, hold Shift and click spacebar. And now let's type in transform, XF. So now let's click add. And as long as your clouds layer was selected originally, it'll pop in between your clouds layer and your planar transform. Again, if yours is off to the side here, just click and drag and hold Shift and place it in between. Now you can increase the size and change the center here or change the pivot, whichever you prefer. Let's make sure that it covers our entire frame. So we've effectively tracked our clouds over top of our scene, and let's go back here to our edit page, and this is our final result. It's looking super good. So if that's all that you came for, I really hope this has helped you to be able to work with sky replacements a lot more effectively, but I'm gonna go through another 2 examples if you really just wanna drill this home, and I'm gonna do it with different footage so that you can maybe see some different situations pop up. So let's take this shot here of some bikers on a hill, and you can see lovely shot, lots of motion, but a really blown out sky. So I'd really like to make the sky pop a lot more and look a lot more picturesque. So we're gonna be doing exactly the same process as before, but we've got a lot more drastic motion in this shot. But you're gonna be surprised at how this is actually a lot less work to deal with than in our previous shot. So let's take our clouds layer here again, place it underneath of our subject layer, make it match up in length, and let's click on our subject layer here that we want to replace. Actually, I'm gonna zoom in slightly on this one because there's some black frames on the top and the bottom, and the same with our cloud layer, zoom in slightly. So now with our subject layer highlighted, let's go to the color section. Let's go through this entire process in rapid speed. So let's go to our qualifier, deselect hue and saturation, click on the sky. Head over to keying, and let's reverse the key. And if none of your stuff is popping up here, it's just because your highlight is not selected. Click that to go back and forth. And seeing that it's not quite perfect, let's go through some quick changes and make sure that more of the sky is selected, but that we don't interfere with our subject at all, especially these 2 bikers here. Let's try to make sure we're not cutting them off at all. And our trees, it's looking okay. Pretty good for the moment. A little bit softening, a little bit of denoise, a little bit of clean white, and a little bit of an in to out ratio. Double check our subjects, make sure that they're looking okay, that we're not cutting them off in any way. Great. Not perfect, but not bad. Now let's right click, add alpha output, and let's connect, and then deselect highlight. And already you can see, ooh, it's looking like a good key, but we've got a problem with those clouds. This is one of those situations where we definitely don't want the clouds to be going crazy. So let's click on our cloud layer, right click, change clip speed, freeze frame, and change. Let's go back to coloring, and we can see this is already looking a little bit better. If you're really paying attention, you will see that we'll need to do some very minor tracking because there is some change in perspective from the camera. It's panning just a little bit. But for the moment, it's looking okay. Let's go to our power windows. Let's create a custom shape here. Nothing too crazy. But what's interesting about this one is that you'll notice after we increase the softness quite a bit, we don't actually have to track this one at all. It's really staying in exactly the same place that we'd like, which is best case scenario. Change this mask a little bit here, noticing that these two don't match perfectly. So I'm actually gonna take the cloud layer and let's just decrease the saturation a little bit. We're actually gonna be working with the curves to brighten it up. It was just a little bit too dark. As you can see, before, after. Just that alone does two things. One, it makes it feel like it's more part of the scene, but two, it takes care of this problem that we have with the trees, because the key isn't that great, but as soon as we make it a little bit brighter, it matches the original scene a lot closer, which makes those problems a lot less noticeable. And you can see here that with minimal work, it's already looking so much better. But we do have some minor tracking that we want to deal with. So let's take this back to our edit tab. Let's make a duplicate just in case we mess up. Highlight these and create a new fusion clip. Make sure that your playhead is over top of the clip that you want to work with. Highlight it and let's dive into the fusion tab. Let's highlight media in 2, check what that is. That's our subject. Let's rename and say subject. And the media in 1 is our clouds layer. So let's right click, rename, clouds. So now let's track our scene. Let's go to our subject layer, highlight it, shift and spacebar, and find our planar tracker and add it in. Make sure you're on the first frame, track, point. I'm gonna do translation and rotation because really the scale isn't changing at all. Despite the fact that we're moving forwards a lot, we're actually not changing our scale in proportion to the mountains. They're staying, you can see that even though we move a lot, the mountains aren't changing in size at all. So we can leave as translation rotation, background luma, and now let's mask around the really high contrast area of the mountains here so that that's what it follows. Making sure that we're on the first frame, let's click track to end. Let's click create planar transform. That pops up this little planar transform node here. Click and drag and then hold shift to integrate that between your clouds and your merge layer. And now our clouds are following that same trajectory, but we do need to scale up our clouds because they are getting cut off on the side here. So click on your clouds layer, shift and spacebar, and look for transform XF, add, and scale up just enough so that you don't get edges of your frame being cut off. It's looking great, but there's one last thing. I'm still not satisfied with this key in the trees here. So we're gonna go back to adjust the keying, but you might notice that, hey, if we're in this fusion clip here, where do we go in order to actually work with the coloring again? Because if we go to color section here, it's working with the fusion clip as a whole, and all of our keying options are sort of gone. To get inside of a fusion clip that you've kind of fused together, just right click and open in timeline. And it'll open up a sub-composition of the two clips that you fused together. Now, if you want to go back and forth really effectively between your timelines, just go to your timeline view options here and make sure that this is selected here, your stacked timelines. Click on that and you'll notice here that your fusion clip and your original timeline will be able to be popped up in the same viewer. So our clips fused together are here. Let's click on our subject and go into the color section. And let's adjust the qualifier here. And let's see what makes an impact. Nice, add a little bit of softening. Adjust the in to out ratio. Clean white. And let's make sure that hasn't messed up any other portions of our clip. Actually, that looks really clean in all of the other areas. And so with that, our final result is now complete. Looking a lot better than we originally had beforehand. But guys, if you notice the clips that we showed at the beginning of this tutorial, we're not just using this to make things look hyper realistic, we're also using them to look hyper surreal. So you can take this same idea and you can add in a piece of footage for a background that you want to completely transform into another world. Something like this nebula here. This is an asset I downloaded from motionarray.com. Let's click and drag that underneath our subject layer. And then click on our subject layer and let's go into our color section here. So let's turn off saturation and hue and let's click to highlight and get a nice selection. Adjust these parameters a little bit, change the softness. And you can see that it's not including this background section over here. That's okay. When you're making such a big change as to make it surreal and unnatural, sometimes you can get away with big chunks being left out like that. Let's go to our keyer. Flip it over. Add alpha output. Turn this off. And we just need to go back and resize this nebula a little bit. Great. Now let's go back. And then we can go to our power windows here. Let's make a very basic selection. Doesn't have to be that extreme at all. Just a very basic shape. Go through from start to finish and make sure that it's working for the entire time. Now in this situation, you want to make sure that it's below sort of the most exaggerated point. So you want to make sure that it's never exposing any sort of sky at any point in time. So take the lowest point there and now go through and make sure that at no point in time is the sky ever showing through. Let's add some softness. And with that, this effect is actually already done. No tracking required whatsoever. And guys, that's how easy it is to get some amazing looking sky replacements right inside of DaVinci Resolve. If you wanted to pick up any assets, like for example, the nebula that we showed in this video, or some stock cloud images and footage, we have all of those available at Motion Array. I'll link to those in the description below. And guys, congratulations for making it to the end. You have a chance to win a 3-month free subscription to motionarray.com. All you have to do is like the video, subscribe to our channel, and leave any sort of comment along with the hashtag MotionArrayGiveaway. Just our way of saying thank you so much. But guys, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.